Last Friday, I was jolted awake at 6 a.m. by the sound of my roommate's dog, Titus, barking. I also became aware of the sound of footsteps and furniture being moved in the bedroom above me, which belonged to my roommate, McKenna. Titus is a big dog with a big voice, but he has a heart of a timid little kitten. He's prone to the occasional fits of barking if he sees an animal outside the window or if someone comes into the house, so I initially chalked it up to McKenna returning home from the family vacation she was taking that week. I rolled over and figured he'd quiet down after a moment. This time, though, the barking didn't stop after a few seconds, and it sounded much more aggressive than usual. It then clicks in my sleepy brain that Titus wouldn't even be barking if it was just McKenna in the house. He's her dog and he's never barked at her once. I also remember McKenna isn't expected home for another 3 days, and would have let us know if she was coming back early. I am fully awake now, and can sense a chill as if the front door had been left open. And I smell cigarettes, even though nobody in my house smokes. My stomach turns. Something is clearly not right. I summon my courage and I open my bedroom door as quietly as possible, Titus going ballistic the entire time. My heart is racing as I slowly begin to ascend the creaky set of stairs to the main floor. I pause for a moment and listen before turning the corner to the landing. The dog is still barking, but I hear no sign of human movement. This calms me, but only for a moment, because upon turning the corner I see an unfamiliar man at the top of the stairs. He appears to be mid-30s, unkempt, wearing filthy, tattered clothes. He's at least 6 feet tall and reeks of cigarettes and body odor. I can smell him from where I'm standing. He's just standing there, muttering some kind of gibberish to himself. He doesn't seem fazed that our dog is ready to rip him to pieces, or even appear to notice my presence, despite how loud the steps are. I'm frozen in fear, wanting to scream but unable to move or even breathe. The whole time I am baffled that nobody in the house has woken up yet, and I'm frantically trying to piece together a plan of action. Scenario after scenario is flashing through my head when the man suddenly stops mumbling. He whips his head around to look directly into my eyes, a wide-eyed, rotten-toothed smile twisting his face as he slowly raises a finger to his lips. Shh. I begin to cry as my heart sinks to my stomach, knowing I have no chance of survival against this man, when he simply turns and shuffles out the front door. I collapse on the landing, tears streaming down my face as I try to process what has just happened. I wake up to one of my roommates and tell them what I'd seen. We walk into McKenna's room, and it appeared that he had been rifling through her drawers. There was also dirt all over her bed as if he had been laying in it. As far as we know, nothing was taken from McKenna's room or the rest of our house. I'm very glad McKenna was gone that night, because this story could have become much darker had she been in her bed. I consider myself extremely lucky this man left on his own accord and didn't appear to have any more sinister intentions than scaring the shit out of me and Titus. Still, I hope we never, ever meet again.
TV shows and movies usually depict abductors driving white or black vans. I didn't realize this until I decided to buy a white 1994 Dodge Ram cargo van to haul some of the gear I needed for work. While driving it, I've been pulled over by cops and searched 3 times for no reason, but that is another story. The point is, some people see vans as suspicious. One day while returning home, a woman pushing a stroller stared at me for a long while I drove along my home street. We have speed bumps, and I have a lot of expensive, delicate gear in the van, so I was driving very slow. She stared at me, wide-eyed, the entire time, so I smiled at her, like a friendly neighbor does. She was staring so intently she almost walked the stroller right off the edge of the curb. I thought it was funny and almost forgot about it. A week later, our HOA email thread heats up when a resident sends out a notice that his wife and toddler were being stalked by a man in a white van. Fearing a pitchfork and torch mob mistaking me for the creeper, I replied to all, saying I live in the neighborhood and also drive a white van. I even provided my license plate number and home address. Big mistake. Jokingly, I added that I also witnessed a suspicious person in the neighborhood. a woman with a stroller who was staring at me so long and hard it made me uncomfortable. I provided the date and time of the incident to see if their alleged stalker was actually me. It was. Dude got triggered. He started sending me email after email, CCing everyone on the list, telling me he can read between the lines of what I was saying. His accusation became more and more ludicrous and turned into personal attacks. Several neighbors on the email list replied that he was behaving badly. The emails eventually stopped, but things got even weirder. On several occasions while out walking my dog, a 10-ish-year-old girl would come out of her house, run over to me, awkwardly chat me up about my dog, and give me strangely intimate details of her life. I wondered why this child was talking to strangers, but thought maybe she just knew me from the neighborhood, so I politely played along. Then one day the girl shows up at my house. She said she was angry because her dad wouldn't let her have a dog like mine, so she wanted to visit my dog for a while. I told her I needed to talk to her parents before I could ever let her visit my home like this. She said okay and left, and I never saw her anymore. I have 2 daughters, and one of their friends told me the girl who was chatting me up is the daughter of the triggered dad from the HOA email list. He had been sending her out to talk to me and taking pictures. My daughter's friend was friends with this bait girl. The poor girl's dad was making her own daughter uncomfortable, which is why she confided in her friend. The dad was sending her daughter out to chat with me so she could accuse me of I don't know what. One detail I forgot to mention. I have dash cams in all of my vehicles and CCTV monitoring my front door, so the initial incident with the wife as well as the girl coming to the front door were recorded. I emailed the triggered dude and kindly offered him copies of the videos of each incident. I also told him I was concerned that his daughter was behaving inappropriately towards strangers. Apparently this scuttled his plan, as I never heard from him again.
For a little context, I grew up my entire childhood without a father. When I turned 15, I got really into hunting and just enjoyed guns in general. My uncle is an avid hunter, gun builder, and ammunition reloader. He loves to hunt. This was a common interest that made us become very close. He was my father figure and taught me a lot that made me the man I am today. Now to the story. My uncle's father lives in Montana, which allowed us to get resident pricing on big game hunting tags. Once a year we would head up to his property and hunt for a week. Usually this would go off without a hitch, and if we were lucky we would get the shot we were looking for. Unfortunately not this year. Just like every year, we headed up to his father's property in northern Montana. That night we headed out to set up some hunting cameras, so that we knew there were deer in that area, so we knew it was a good place to hunt. It must have been 1 a.m., and we were driving down this 2-lane dirt road headed into the woods. We were always the only people on the road, since it was so early in the morning. This particular time we saw headlights approaching from behind us, but thought nothing of it. We figured they must have been doing the same thing as us. After tailing us for some time, the headlights disappeared, which was strange since there were no turns on this particular road. A few seconds go by and all of a sudden we see the truck driving on the shoulder to our right with the lights off. The shoulder was a small hill with brush and a fence fairly close to it. Definitely something that nobody should be driving on. The truck speeds up and gets back on the road, turns its lights back on and speeds off into the darkness. This sets off some red flags, but we figured they were just impatient and wanted to get there before us. No big deal. Or so we thought. We drove down the road for a few more miles until we saw taillights stopped in the middle of the road. It was the truck that passed us a few miles back. They had set up traffic cones to completely block the road off, and there was another truck parked on the shoulder. We figured they must have broken down, so we stopped. I had read an article online earlier this year about people in other countries that would make roadblocks to rob and kill people for their vehicles and belongings. I laughed and started to tell my uncle about this article, when 2 men from each truck jumped out of their vehicles and started to approach ours. My uncle always kept 2 handguns on shoulder holsters under his arms when we were out doing this kind of thing. This saved our lives. 2 of the men stayed at the tailgate of the truck parked on the road, and the other 2 men came up to his window. At this point, my uncle had his right hand in his jacket and was holding the gun. The men were extremely friendly and said that the truck on the shoulder had broken down and that they were just helping him out. They asked if my uncle knew anything about cars and if he could come take a look at the problem. My uncle refused, and this made the men angry. Both instantly drew pistols, and one of the men rounded the front of the truck towards my window. My uncle grabbed the man's gun that was pointed at him, which he forgot to load a round into, luckily for us. My uncle pulled his gun out and shot the man in the shoulder and slammed on the gas, driving on the left shoulder past all of the men. I looked back and could see the other 3 men gathering around the man my uncle shot. We drove and drove and drove for what seemed like an eternity without saying a word to each other. We drove back to his dad's house, and he told me to go to bed. He called the police and told them what happened. They sent out 2 officers to the house to take his statement, and mentioned to him that they had quite a few reports of roadblocks being set up all around northern Montana. They were able to catch all 4 of the men who stopped us that night when they took the man who was shot to the hospital.
We all have that one ex that just grinds our gears, but mine is fairly more creepy than the average drunk texting a-hole. About 3 years ago, I was in a long-distance relationship with a younger man, meaning he was only 17 at the time, while I turned 19 in the relationship. His name is Peter. Peter was not a nice person to say the least. He thought that the first impression he made on people was the only one he needed, and as such he stopped being nice, polite, or reasonable to people after the first meeting. I was young and saw past this, thinking I could somehow change him. However, this abuse towards people around me and myself eventually became too much, and I broke off the relationship with him. The breakup went smoothly, all things considered, except he wanted me to say the words, so he could play the victim. This has been a core element of our fighting, because he hinted that he wanted to break up, but instead of just saying it, he kept me on the hook and became even more abusive. I'm getting sidetracked, but the point was that I thought of the matter as resolved and entered a loving relationship with my current boyfriend shortly after this. Then came the day where Peter wanted to get his belongings back. I texted him a list of everything he had left in my apartment, and he okayed that it was everything. We also made an appointment for him to stop by my apartment around 3 p.m. the following Thursday. I have no intentions of letting him back into my home, nor being alone with him, since he suddenly seems to have many mood swings after seeing me in another relationship. He has blocked my Facebook account, but somehow knew I was in a new relationship, which was a major red flag to me and my boyfriend. Thursday came, and I felt eager just to be done with it. My boyfriend and I are walking home from high school when my phone rings. It's Peter. He yells at me that he has now been waiting at the train station for over an hour. I try to reason with him, agree to meet him there with his belongings since he needs to catch a train. My boyfriend walks with me to the train station, but we arrive only to find it vacant. I live in a small town and the train station is mostly used during rush hours in the morning and evening. It is also located rather bizarrely among normal residences, and there are a lot of off alleyways leading all over town from there. I get a text stating that Peter can see us, but won't come out of hiding when my boyfriend is there. We leave his stuff on a bench at the train station, calmly replying that I'm not actually interested in meeting with him. When I say calmly, I meant that my reply is calm. I'm shaking, and my boyfriend is furious over this child's play. On our way home, I receive another text. This time, he states that he has a gift for me, and it's in my mailbox. This freaks us out even more, mostly because this indicates that he might be waiting at my home. It is entirely possible that he watched us on the train station and then ran all the way to my apartment. However, there is no trace of him and nothing except a bill in my mailbox. By now, we figure that he is acting up out of spite and proceeds to ignore the bombardment of texts, calls, and so forth that follows that day. After a while, life returns to normal. Then I get another call, this time from my ex's elder brother, who is worried about his sibling. Apparently he has disappeared, taking one of his brother's gas pistols. I am speechless, but since I haven't seen anything, I shake it off as another childish act. The same day, my boyfriend sees police officers walking around the basement staircase on the exterior of the house we lived in while doing some grocery shopping. He did this every day at around 4 p.m. The next day, we are contacted by my boyfriend's mother. In the newspaper, there's a description of an unnamed young man from the same town as Peter who had been arrested for attempted robbery of the pizza place I lived above. He was armed with a knife, a gas pistol, and lighter fluid, while stating that he was not attempting a robbery, but there to visit an ex, presumably me. Contacting the police, I discovered he also had a mask, fake papers, and a wig in a duffel bag, which he had thrown down in the staircase when, around 4 p.m., he had jumped a fence and tried to enter the pizza place. This means that my boyfriend went out our front door while my ex was hiding right beside the front door armed. I have never been that freaked out before. The sad truth is that my ex never got charged with anything because he was a minor, as a father with a military background and money. I write this now because after 3 years, I thought that this horror story was finally a closed chapter. That was until I received a declaration of love from a fake email account signed Peter, and I received this just 2 weeks ago.
This just happened a few days ago, and I'm extremely shaken up. Some backstory. I live on the 2nd floor of a 3rd-level apartment. We have a crawl space that connects all the apartments. We aren't sure why it's there, but we all have stuff in it, and none of us would ever even attempt to go inside of it if we felt pretty safe. The other night the sun was setting, but it wasn't pitch black out or anything yet. I'm walking through my living room when I see a short woman on my fire escape looking in my windows. This is extremely bizarre considering it's still semi-light out, and she had to literally get onto the fire escape somehow. We have 2 windows that the fire escape reaches, and she was looking in both of them, but she didn't see me. I crawled onto the ground, and my heart was racing as I watched her try to open the windows. I didn't know what to do because my phone was in the other room. After what seemed like an eternity, she finally left. I went into my room to get my phone to text my landlord and the cops. I went back into the living room and was looking out the window to see if I could locate her, when all of a sudden I hear a weird noise coming from the ceiling. We had one of those tile ceilings made out of separate slabs of cork/wood. I look up to see one of the slabs lifted and 2 eyes staring at me. I have no clue how she got into that crawl space so quickly, but I grabbed the nearest thing next to me, which was a broom, and started hitting her with it through the ceiling and called the cops as soon as she crawled away. They showed up and searched the place, but didn't find her until days later when she was on someone else's fire escape. The cops said that she definitely was on some hard drugs, and that she was violent towards them.
A couple of years ago, I used to attend a boarding school in Singapore. This was for the last 2 years of high school, or junior college as we called it. I'm a Catholic, and since none of my friends in the boarding school were practicing Catholics, I attended Sunday Mass on my own every week. If you've been to Singapore, you know it's one of the best countries to go around on your own. It's sometimes even more fun than going around with other people, so this wasn't something that bothered me too much. This Sunday in question came before a long week of submissions and tests, so I was already stressed to begin with. On top of that, I had also somehow managed to oversleep. I liked attending the 8 a.m. Mass. It was one with the best choir, so I had to splurge in a cab instead of taking the bus like I usually do. I only got a limited amount of money for the month from the parents, and I spent most of it on food, so by the time I walked into church, I was upset and just looking for some peace. I guess the stress made me look frazzled and upset, which might have been what caught his attention. As I was late for the Mass, I had to stand at the back of the church with the other latecomers, as there were no seats left open for us. This man was standing a few feet to my right. He was wearing spectacles and an eternal frown. He was Chinese, like almost everyone else in the church. I noticed him scowling at me throughout the Mass, but ignored him on purpose because I didn't want to get angry unnecessarily. I was the only Indian in my boarding school, so I was used to receiving weird, I'm not racist, but comments from peers and occasionally teachers. It didn't help that the area in which my school and also this church were located was a pretty rich neighborhood, and I had never seen an obviously non-Chinese person in the church. So the too long didn't read was I was used to being a stared-at minority. I refused to pay this guy any attention. What happened next took place during a lull in the Mass, during the distribution of communion. Many people tend to move out of the church after receiving communion, so a seat opened up near where I and the man were standing. I moved towards it, and after making sure there were no elderly around me who would like the seat, sat there. The man maneuvered himself so that he was standing behind me. This is when I began feeling unsafe, and then he began talking. His words were not directed towards anyone in particular. He seemed to be there on his own. The silence in the church only served to amplify what he was saying. Only in our section, though, he wasn't speaking that loud. Basically, apropos of nothing, this random guy began railing about how the Indians were destroying his beautiful country. He went on about how they were prostituting themselves in the streets in Gailang, sticking up their schools and hospitals, and making Singapore into a jungle. How the government needs to throw out all of them. He said a bunch of other things that I don't remember now. He also repeated a lot of stuff, which is why it got stuck in my head. He must have said prostituting at least 5 times and maybe even switched it out for whoring once or twice. It was obvious his words were meant for me. I turned around to look at him when he first began, with a kind of "are you kidding me" look and expression on my face. He was staring at me, his face the stock image for hatred and rage. The people around him were shifting uncomfortably. I turned back around, shut my eyes, and willing him quiet. He didn't shut up. At some point, I began quietly crying. I wanted so badly to move away, to run out of the church, but I was scared of causing a scene and making people notice me in a way I didn't want to be noticed. I cannot fully explain the absurdity of the situation. We were in a church. In some other section, the priest was still distributing communion to the congregation. The rest of the church sat in prayerful silence. And in the back, in this one corner, this random guy was spewing hateful, racist comments directed at a 17-year-old, and nobody said a word to shut him up. When the priest returned to the altar and had us rise for the final blessing, I took that opportunity to get out of my pew and move away from the man. To my horror, he followed. The Mass had ended by then, and people were moving towards the exit, as was I. He followed behind me, raised his voice, asking me where I was going, called me a prostitute several times. That was when a lady in the vicinity said something like, "Don't say that, don't use those words." But when I looked at her thinking she would help me get away from this guy, she refused to meet my eye and move forward. We got out of the church. I couldn't see the guy anymore, so I ran blindly towards the exit and in the direction of the bus stop. I couldn't think straight, didn't know what I looked like, had no clue what was happening. I got to the bus stop and decided to get onto the first bus that pulled up, even if it was going the wrong route. I thought I was safe and got my phone out of my purse. Then I turned around and, like a horror movie, he was there, walking towards me. The other people at the bus stop was a woman and a kid. I didn't feel confident enough to approach them and ask for help, so, fingers shaking, I unlocked my phone and called my roommate. She answered the phone groggily. I had probably woken her up, and without waiting for her to say anything, I told her very loudly that a strange man had followed me from the church to the bus stop, and he had been verbally abusing me, and I didn't feel safe. The man, who had been advancing towards me all this time, went and stood with the woman and the child, who had also heard me and moved away from him. A bus pulled up. I got in, the doors closed, and we pulled away. In that moment, I was so overwhelmed by what had happened that I stood at the entrance of the bus, next to the bus driver, and just burst out crying. I don't remember what was going through my head. My heart was going crazy in my chest. I must have been having the worst panic attack. The bus driver and everyone else in the bus was staring at me like I was crazy, probably. At the next stop, the driver asked me if I was okay, and when I couldn't respond, asked me where I needed to go. I gave him the name of my school. A passenger who had just gotten into the bus took me back out, explained to me which bus I would need to take, and asked someone also waiting at the bus stop to make sure I caught the right bus. Somehow, I got back to the boarding school. I had left my roommate on call, and it had made her extremely worried. By the time I got back to my room, she had notified our mentor and had placed a call to the church to ask if I was still there and if they could find me. They obviously didn't know anything. So I guess that's my story. I just want to clarify that besides this one experience, I had never felt unsafe in Singapore, and I am not in any way trying to post that all Singaporeans are discriminatory towards Indians. This did shake me thoroughly though, and I couldn't bring myself to go back to that church for a long time. I truly hope I, or anyone else for that matter, am never placed in a similar situation ever again.
This happened in September of 2015, and I finally decided to share my story after confirming some details with my roommate who used to stay with me in a PG, paying guest accommodation. We used to stay in a 3-bedroom apartment in a building, on the 3rd floor. Me and my roommate shared one of the rooms, and there was other girls staying in the rest of the rooms. It had been about 15 days since we had moved in. We were not very happy staying there because there were routine water problems, the food was bad, etc. We wanted to move out really bad, so my parents and my roommate's parents were going to come pick us up the next day. The night before, which was a Friday, we had some other girls over in our room. We were just having some fun, listening to music and chatting. We were making the most of it since we wouldn't be meeting them anytime soon after we moved out. It was around 2 a.m. and everyone decides it's time to go to sleep. We all said our goodbyes. The other girls went back into their rooms. My roommate was already asleep. Since I wanted some water and had to use the restroom, I had to go out of the room. It took me about 15 minutes to come back. Everything seemed normal. As I was just about to switch off the lights and lie down, I get a call from one of the girls in the room adjacent to ours. I pick it up and she says to come over to her room as quickly and quietly as possible, not waking my roommate up. I was immediately spooked, but I refused to think anything wrong might have happened. I took my time to go out, and she met me right outside my door. She looked worried. The first thing she asked me was, "Is the door to your room leading to the balcony locked?" I remember I hadn't bothered to secure the latch/deadbolt on it that night because the weather was quite humid. The door was closed, but just not bolted like it would usually be on other days, so I replied no. She tells me to immediately and quietly. I managed to do it. I ask her what's up, because I was really scared by then. She tells me that just about 5 minutes ago she heard whispering from the balcony. Her room has access to the same balcony. At first she thought it was one of us, but when the whispering wouldn't stop, she went to check from her window. She couldn't see anything in the dark except the clothesline, which was shaking in a way as if someone had just pulled on it. She found it weird and decided to switch off the lights in her room and try to look out again. This time she saw a shadow running past her window and towards ours. It looked like it was a man. At this point she was sure it was an intruder and quickly called me to warn me. After hearing this, I was so glad that whoever that guy was didn't try to enter our room, because I would have been scared shitless and I wouldn't have known what to do. I wake up my roommate, tell her not to scream or make any noise as I tell her what just happened. Then I look out of our window and onto the balcony, but I couldn't see anyone there. We figured the intruder escaped to the terrace, because that's the only safe exit as our balcony was quite high up, so jumping onto the ground wouldn't have been possible. We both decided to sleep in another room, leaving the lights, our stuff, everything in our room as it is. The other room had 3 girls there already, but they didn't mind letting us share their beds. The 6 of us in total huddled together in 2 beds. The other girls slept just fine, but my roommate and I couldn't get a wink of sleep. We were thinking about what would have happened if that guy had tried anything before we were warned. We would have been completely defenseless. Not even a bat, knife, anything. We didn't sleep until 6 a.m., right after my roommate spoke to her mom narrating this entire incident. Her mom was really pissed. At around 10 a.m. when our parents came to pick us up, we had our things packed. We left, but not before our moms gave the landlady an earful. Looking back, the intruder must have been some guy who knew the building well, and also the fact that our balcony was accessible from the terrace. Also, The fact the clothesline was shaking when we looked outside was maybe because the guy had pulled on it when he was trying to hoist himself onto the terrace. We don't know why he decided to come there at that time of night.
I have a phobia, scopophobia, the fear of being watched. I have this weird compulsion. Whenever I see a doorway, a window, or virtually any surface that I believe someone could hide behind, I imagine a face peering out at me, staring. I imagine what I would do. What could I do? You will soon find out why I have this phobia. On to the story. I'll try my best to remember all the details, but my mind has repressed a lot of it. Around June of 2016, my mother and I were living in a small apartment. There was no basement or attic, obviously, but there was one tiny crawl space in the closet floor of my bedroom. I never looked in it. I suppose someone would be overwhelmed with curiosity, but my mind had already imagined all the worst scenarios. I decided to leave whatever dead bodies and ghosts were down there for whoever rented after us. It was a nice apartment, small but perfect for the two of us. We lived there for a few peaceful months, until the noises started. It was nothing extreme, just the odd bump in the night, and particularly scratching. My mom just brushed it off as rats in the walls. As long as they stayed in there, I saw no reason to get rid of them. A week or two later, I had already grown used to the noise. It became almost comforting in a way. After all, I never really liked silence. That is until I awoke one night to a different noise, a rolling sound, eerily similar to the sound my closet made when I opened it. I peeked my eyes open and looked over, but I couldn't make out anything in the dark. I thought maybe I saw something move, but I was well aware of how the mind plays tricks on you in the dark. There was only one way to find out. I turned on my lamp. I feel like crying just writing this down. It's been almost a year since I had to recall this night. When I turned on the light, I expected to just see a closet full of coats. But what I saw was much, much worse. It was an eye. Not just an eye, but the entire half of someone's face, barely visible in the tiny crack he had opened. He didn't even react to being caught. No smile, no fear, just watching. My heart has never beat faster than that night. I wish I screamed or maced him or anything, but I just stared back, frozen in time until I couldn't hold it in anymore. I began sobbing loudly. I think I tried to say something along the lines of, "What do you want?" but it was garbled by my crying. He opened the door more. I could now see his entire body, which I don't care to describe as I've spent 2 long years trying to forget that face. Shh. I lost my breath at that. Hearing him made it real. I couldn't pretend this was some messed up hallucination anymore. At this, I sat up and pressed my face back against the wall. "It's okay, Julie." He said it so cheerfully. It gave me chills just remembering it. This is when I finally had the courage to run out of the room. This creep knew my name. My name. My mom, still half asleep while she called the police, thought I had imagined it. Of course, by the time the police got there, he was already long gone. All that was left of him was that crawl space. I still never looked inside. Though writing this now, I kinda wish I did. Having some sort of proof of this would, I don't know, comfort me? Because at least you all would know I'm not crazy. Apparently he had been living in there. For how long, I don't know. But the officers who arrived on the scene said that there were tally marks inside the crawl space. I didn't want to know how many. I didn't want to know whether he was marking days or weeks. I just wanted to leave that apartment, and we did. The police never found him, not for certain. They thought they found a homeless man who matched his description, but he was apparently unresponsive. I've always thought they didn't take it all that seriously. They just thought he was a squatter, even after I told them he knew my name. They thought that given how long he had seemingly been squatting, he had probably just heard my name through the floorboards. And since that night, he has been the face I always see when there's an open door or closet. It's grown more distorted as time goes on, but I can always make out a part of his pursed lips, as if though he's still shushing me, even now. It's gotten easier with time, but I don't think it will ever leave me completely. Anyways, I guess we didn't actually have rats. I'm a girl, and this story takes place my senior year of high school. It had taken me a while to catch up on the whole driving thing, as I had failed both the permit and driving test each one time, so I only had my license for about 9 months at the time. You know how that first year you have your license and car, you're in this weird afterglow where you love driving everywhere? Yeah, that was my senior year of high school. I volunteered to drive my friends everywhere, loving the freedom I had of not having to conform to my parents' work schedules to hang out with friends. My parents were extremely lax, so they didn't ask any questions and never really implemented a curfew. One random weekday in October, I was hanging out with a few friends from work later at night. I had volunteered to drive, which was typical of me at the time, so I picked up 2 of my coworkers and we all hung out at a third's house. We all had school in the morning, so we called it a night around 11. None of us went to the same school, so it was about a half hour to drop everyone off, as we lived in 3 different towns. The easiest way to get home after dropping off my last friend was to take a shortcut out through the sticks. During the day, the drive was beautiful with huge mansions that sat far off the road. However, at night, not so much. It was very, very dark, and since the houses sat so far off the road, they didn't provide any light for the street. It was still very early fall, so the tree foliage spilled out over the streets, giving it a canopy-like appearance. It looked eerie at night, with the lights from my car illuminating the woods surrounding me. This was at the height of the clown sightings across the country, so I was more concerned about seeing one of those than about any real danger. I didn't particularly like driving down this road at night, but it only took about 10 minutes, as opposed to taking the main roads littered with traffic lights. Probably 3 or so miles into the road, a construction van turned onto the road I was on from a second country road. The van was very far off in front of me, probably a football field distance. I had my high beams on naturally because this country road had no street lamps. As I came closer and closer to the van, I noticed that they were traveling really slow, like barely moving. Then once I was only about a car length away, I noticed the van wasn't actually moving slow. It was just parked, in the middle of a dark country road, blocking me in. I'm a pretty observant person. I've watched 1,000,001 horror movies. I immediately thought this was a lure of some sort, maybe to get me out of my car, or I don't know. I quickly made sure my doors were locked and turned off my high beams and regular lights. My plan was to just reverse a few miles before I was back on the main road. But before I even put the car in reverse, the van's brake lights turned off and started continuing down the road. I watched it pull away, hoping to let it gain some room between my car. It rounded a corner of the road, and once it was past my line of sight, I turned my beams back on and continued down the road. As soon as I rounded the corner, there the van was parked again. I actually yelped because I hadn't expected the van to still be so close. Do you ever round the corner of a hallway and someone is right in front of you and it makes you jump a little? That's what it was like, except I was a 17-year-old girl in a little sedan blocked in on a dark country road by a stereotypical serial killer van. This time the van was more centered in the road, making it abundantly clear that I couldn't pass them. I began to feel panicked because now I was only about 2 feet from the van's back bumper. If they were to jump out of the car and attack me, I would only have a few seconds to react. My little old sedan's locks were probably easily broken. I didn't want to look out my side windows, afraid of what I might see. I decided it would take scratching the side of my car over being murdered on the side of the road. I quickly tried to pull around the van, but it immediately jutted back in front of me, cutting me off. Now the van was diagonal across the road, with the front being used to cut me off. My driver's side was now level with the van's. If I were to look out of the windshield, I would see the face of whoever was doing this. I felt them freaking staring at me like prey. I put my hood up, hoping the driver couldn't see the fact that I was a girl. I didn't look up towards the driver and threw the car in reverse. Once I started pulling away from him, the van started driving away again. I watched as this idiot drove away again. I know what you're thinking. Turn around and go the other way. I didn't have enough room to turn around quickly and didn't want to take the time to do what would probably be a 10-point turn, which would leave me even more vulnerable to being blocked in. At this point, I was already 10 minutes into the woods and only about a mile or less from main roads. I waited once again until the van was around another corner. I started inching forward, not wanting to stay still any longer. Before I even full rounded the next curve, I could see this freaking van trying again to block me in. This time the van was pulled onto the side of the road as if to let me pass. I waited before passing. I thought the van would try to run me off the road once I tried to pass that, or if it was a final setup for an ambush. I took probably 10 seconds thinking about what to do. This perv probably assumed I would slowly drive by as to see what they look like and to ensure I didn't scratch my car. So I did just the opposite of that. I gunned it past the van. To no avail. The van immediately pulled off the side of the road to try to run me off the road, but I passed by too quickly. Instead, it rode by my back bumper less than a foot probably and flashed its high beams at me non-stop. This crazy person was trying to blind me and run me off the road. This country road was a 25, but we were both easily going 60 plus. I could see the main road now and cars driving on it. It was just a straight shot. The only thing separating me from this freak was one little traffic light. The van didn't slow down as we quickly approached the light. If I even slowed down 5 miles per hour, I'd be rear-ended. Once I noticed the van slowing, I stopped at the light. Instead of stopping behind me, the van pulled up right next to me. Keep in mind, this wasn't a 2-lane road, so this crazy psycho was parked in a lane for oncoming traffic just so he could be next to me. I laid on my horn at the light, hoping it would make it turn faster. As soon as the van overcame its inertia and could actually come to a complete stop, the driver's side door swung open. In a fraction of a second, I could see a man round the back of the van and approach my driver's side door. He was tall, probably about 6 foot, and on the larger side. He probably had $150 on me weight-wise. I screamed, not knowing what else to do. I turned back to the light, praying to every god I could think of that it would turn to green. The man reached for my driver's side door. I lurched the car forward, checking for oncoming traffic, and just blatantly ran the red light and pulled onto the main road. I was back into civilization. As I sped away, I watched for the man in the rearview mirror. He stayed waiting on the little country road. I always found it ironic he was willing to terrorize me and do God knows what, but he wasn't willing to run a red light. For the next 30 minutes, I drove in circles through my town just to make sure I wasn't being followed. I called my brother before I arrived home, asking him to wait for me outside so I didn't have to walk up our driveway alone. He reluctantly obliged. I pulled into my driveway and was greeted by my annoyed brother. He walked me inside. Once inside, I started crying from pure relief. I couldn't even get the words out to my brother about what happened. Once I gained my composure, I just told my brother I had almost hit a deer. I knew if I said I had almost been kidnapped on a country road less than a mile from our house, my parents then definitely wouldn't have been so laxed about me driving anymore. I made sure to check the mailbox every day for a ticket from running that red light. About a month and a half later, I received it. For those who have never gotten a ticket for running a red light, they send you a picture from the traffic cam of the incident. The picture captured me, pulling out onto the main road, but it also captured the man as he approached my car. With his right hand, he reached my driver's side door, and with his left hand, he had what was clearly a weapon. It looked like a long stick, a baton I think they're called. He was probably a split second away from smashing my driver's side window. Just goes to show you how truly vulnerable we are as people. I could have played that situation just a little different and ended up dead in a ditch. I don't even like to think about it. This was easily the scariest incident of my life. I brought the traffic cam photo to my local police station, and they told me that they would look into it. It's been about 1.5 years, and I still haven't heard a follow-up from them, and doubt I will. But now whenever I go visiting a friend who lives out on the other side of the sticks, I don't mind taking a main road, even if it means waiting at a bunch of traffic lights. It cost me about $150 to pay off the ticket for running the red light, but it's the best $150 I've ever spent.
This is a long one, but was so bizarre I think it's worth telling. I wanted to share it because this person recently tried to friend my husband on Facebook, and it brought back crazy memories and I need to vent it out. I got married right at 18. I was a pretty book-smart kid, but lacked street smarts. By the time I turned 20, my now ex-husband and I moved into a rental property in a pretty nice suburb outside Chicago. In the basement of the house was a big mother-in-law suite, where a good male friend of ours, Nick, lived as well. I was about halfway through nursing school at this time. This particular semester of nursing school, I had a very clinical rotation once a week. I was 21 at the time. I am not a morning person, so in order to maximize the amount of time I spent asleep, I started loading all my stuff into my car the night before. Bags, books, and even my purse. Again, street smarts lacking. One particular night before clinicals, I asked my ex-husband Bobby to get a book from my car. Bob does, but forgets to lock the door. The next morning when I get to my car, I note that my purse is gone. I ended up filing a police report. I was most concerned because I had just gotten this new job as a nurse's aide at a hospital, and I had my social security card still sitting in my wallet. Strike 3 for street smarts. Almost immediately after that theft, strange things started to happen. We started getting ding-dong ditches all hours of the day and night. Someone vandalized mine, Nick, and Bob's car with strange graffiti, Nazi swastikas, hangmen, etc. Egged our house, slashed Nick's tires. We first chalked it up to neighborhood pranksters, but when we started having damages that cost some decent money, we called the police. Not to mention one day when Bob was out mowing the lawn, he noticed piles of cigarette butts outside the bedroom window. The police came out, pretty much did nothing but take a report, and told us to perhaps invest in car alarms and some brighter floodlights for the driveway. A few weeks after this, at 2:30 in the morning, I get a call on my cell. It was the police in a neighboring town. They had picked someone up who had my ID on him, someone named Craig J. When they asked why he had someone else's ID on him, he claimed I was his girlfriend. The cop called me because my name had popped that I'd filed a police report for theft. I assured the cops that I had never met him before, and was told that I could pick up my ID at the police station within the next few days. Things really started to escalate at that point, but I still didn't make the connection that perhaps these incidents were related. I started getting strange messages on MySpace. This was in 2009, as well as on Facebook, from clearly fake accounts with long-winded messages that made no sense. This person started messaging friends of mine as well. I deleted MySpace and blocked this person on Facebook, but new accounts kept getting created. Somehow this person got my email address and started sending emails as well. I had no idea who this person could be, but they seemed to know details about me that indicated that this was either someone I knew or knew someone I knew. The messages weren't overtly threatening, but creepy enough to where I started becoming uncomfortable. One night my friend Lauren and I were sitting on the couch watching TV. Bob, Lauren's husband, and a few other friends had gone out for the night. As we're sitting around chilling, we hear something that sounds like someone shaking the garage door. It was an attached garage. I go and check the garage. Nothing seems out of the ordinary. We had the occasional issues with raccoons, so I chalked it up to that. But the noise kept continuing. Lauren and I are getting freaked out at this point. Now, understand the layout of the house. I was in a modern-style ranch house with no upstairs. The garage sounds moved to now the kitchen window. A distinct sound of someone knocking or scratching hard on the windows. We called our husbands, who did not answer. At this point, we debated calling the police. What if it was an animal or tree branches? We don't want to seem stupid. As we debated, I see Lauren's face go sheet white and she looks past me. I spin around and I can see the fortunately locked handle of the door wiggling. We were seated near the kitchen. We jump up. Lauren grabs a knife from the butcher block on the counter. I grab a small hammer from the junk drawer. We book it to the back of the house where the bedrooms are, cell phone in hand, and lock ourselves in one of the bedrooms and call the police. The dispatcher tells us to stay on the line, move furniture in front of the door if possible, and that the police are on the way. We shove a dresser in front of the door, knife and hammer in hand. We agreed that if this guy was going to come in, he might be bigger and stronger than us, but we were not going down without a fight. We plan. If he comes in before the cops, I go for the head with the hammer. She goes for the gut with the knife. Cops show up, banging on the front door, shouting police. We can see the red and blue lights through the window. We leave the room, let the cops in. They find no signs of anyone present or evidence of an attempted break-in. They take a report. In the meanwhile, our husbands finally call us back. They come home and the cops leave. Flash forward a few months. A very close friend of ours, Sean, was renovating his apartment and needed a place to crash along with his girlfriend. Bob and I decided he could stay in the third bedroom in our house. The first night Sean stays with us, we are awakened at 2 a.m. by Sean screaming at someone. Bob and I jump out of bed and rush into the hall into Sean's room. Sean and his girlfriend are wide awake, lights on, looking totally freaked out. The screen is sliced and flopping in the wind. Sean told us he woke up to someone using what he thought was a knife on the screen and started climbing in through the window. We call the cops. They come out and take a statement. Sean describes the guy as best he could. A white male, young-looking, semi-shaved head with what looked like darker hair. Cops dust for fingerprints. Comes back as a match for Craig J. Turns out, I knew who he was. Vaguely. He was a year younger than me and we had gone to the same high school, but I couldn't remember having any significant interactions with him. He lived with his parents only a few blocks from my parents' house. I ended up reaching out to high school acquaintances who knew him, and they remembered him as a nice but odd kid. Kind of quiet, but definitely on the strange side, who had dropped out of high school before graduation. Upon realizing that Sean had just moved in, the cop makes a statement that chilled us all. He probably didn't realize anyone was staying in this bedroom and thought the room would be empty. Cops go there and arrest him. He suddenly has quite the story for them. Him and I were secret lovers. I was ignoring him. We had a relationship. He also had been allowed into my home many times. I am floored. He gets charged with something like trespassing or breaking and entering and does light time for it. Maybe a month, and has to pay a fine. In the meantime, I get a restraining order on him. He gets out, and I hear nothing from him. I also develop a completely irrational fear of first-floor windows. Around Christmas of 2010, I am now 23. I figure the whole Craig thing is in the past. Bob and I decided to divorce, unrelated to this, and go our separate ways, and Nick has long since moved out. We end the lease. I move to a less desirable suburb, but with affordable rent. I settle on an apartment in a 4-unit building that had a locked entrance, and the only way in was with the key or with someone who opened the door from the inside. I lived on the 2nd floor. By this time I had graduated and was now a nurse, and was working now at a nursing home. Spring/summer of 2010. It started up again, with calls coming through to me at work, only to have someone hang up. Letters suddenly appeared in the staff-only mailbox mailed to me with no return address. The strange emails started up again from random accounts. The messages never overtly threatening, but they were long, way too frequent, way too out there. He spoke to me as if we were long-lost friends and had some sort of connection. I don't think he ever threatened to hurt me, although the cutting into my house with a knife? I don't know what was going through his mind. What I kind of seemed to place together over the years from all his rambling is that he had some sort of crush on me when I was younger, although I never remember even speaking to him during high school, and him happening to rob my car was some sort of sign from the universe, or something that we were meant to be together. I call the cops. They basically tell me that because there have been no threats, and other than an OOP or a cease and desist, there's not much they can do except watch and wait. This goes on for a while. And finally one night I wake up at 2 a.m. to the doorbell ringing. I'm instantly in a panic. I look at the window. There, illuminated in the floodlight, is Craig. I burst out crying. In my half-awake state, I run across the hall and start banging on my neighbor's door. He was an older divorced guy who lived alone. He goes downstairs, confronts Craig and tells him the cops have been called. And I actually call the cops. He takes off. I file a report and they claim they will talk to him. But this only makes things worse. Friends I have on Facebook now start getting random messages from Craig, asking about me, telling them he has important information for me. Other time he alternates saying that I owe him money and I have a debt I need to pay off. My friends block him as he goes along. Meanwhile, my younger sister is living in the city with a few friends. He somehow finds out where she is and drives to her apartment and confronts her while she has people over. She freaks out. They kick him out. She calls the cops, who basically again state that he didn't commit a crime but offer her a restraining order. Right after this, another incident. My younger cousin is a high school senior on the cross-country team. He shows up at my cousin's practice. My cousin has no clue who he is. He starts demanding information on me. The coach gets involved. Craig gets in a fight with the coach. The cops get called and he's banned from school grounds, but nothing more. He calls the nursing home administrator at my job, asking him to talk to me and that he has important information to tell me. The administrator tells him not to come on the property or he will have him arrested for trespassing. My work was now aware of the situation. At this point, I'm paranoid beyond measure. Then, just as quickly as it started, it faded off. It's now summer of 2012 and the final capper in this saga. I'm almost 25 now. A friend of mine named Stacy, and incidentally Sean's ex, moves in with me temporarily while she was looking for a place. She was dating a new guy and spent quite a few nights at his place. One day I picked up a double shift, starting at 7 a.m. and ending at 11:30 p.m. Stacy texts me at around 3:30 p.m. stating she won't be home that night and she was going out with the other guy. I arrive home at almost midnight. First thing I notice is that the door is unlocked. Uneasy but thinking perhaps Stacy had forgotten to lock it, I cautiously peer inside. I pan my gaze to the kitchen and the living room. I can't shake the feeling that I'm unsettled. Something wasn't sitting right. Due to all of those incidents, I always make sure that 1 or 2 lights were on, even when we weren't home. I was still not even fully in the door when I noticed that I was staring into a pitch black apartment, and immediately my brain went into full panic. And I'm glad it did. Realistically, Stacy could have forgotten to leave a light on, but my instincts were in overdrive and sounding off alarm bells. My Puerto Rican neighbor who lived in one of the building units was well known for his weekend parties, and I could hear a party going on downstairs. I book it down the stairs and bust into the party and tell him what happened. He looks at me like I'm crazy, but agrees to come upstairs with me. We get inside. He looks around. We see nobody. I'm starting to wonder if I'm just nuts. Maybe Stacy had her boyfriend over and he just left in a hurry, forgetting to turn on the low lights and lock the door. He agrees with me and sort of jokingly pulls on the pantry door. What I saw next will never ever leave my mind. There, crouching inside, is Craig. Puerto Rican guy puts the guy in a chokehold. I call the police. To this day, I have no idea what he was planning on doing. Cops come out and he's arrested. Because my neighbor was having a party, he had the door open to the alleyway. Chances are he just walked into the building, and if anyone even noticed, people would just assume he was there for the party or whatever. It's more confusing how he got into the apartment itself. My theory is, my roommate at the time was from the country. While I lived in a suburb, it was the type of suburb right on the edge of a major US city, so we always locked our doors and generally kept everything secure as a rule. She was used to leaving her doors unlocked and wide open, and I think honestly it may have just slipped her mind as she went out the door for the night. I confronted her about it and of course she denied it, but that's really the only logical way he could have gotten in. I always locked both the knob and the deadbolt whenever I left the house. Unless he was some skilled locksmith, I have no idea how he could have gotten in. I didn't stay alone or go anywhere by myself for a long time after that. I feel that I actually developed a paranoia because of all this, and was highly suspicious of giving my number or any information out to anyone. He ended up being charged and convicted of aggravated stalking, breaking and entering, and some other charges. I did meet his parents in court, who were both shockingly very normal and apologetic people. They tried explaining their son. They claimed he was mentally ill and suffered from bipolar disorder. When he's medicated, he's okay. When he's off his meds, he's nuts. After he served time, I did not hear from him for years, until 2016 when he found me on Facebook. I was much older now, around 29. I replied to him firmly that any contact would end in the police being called, and that I had no interest in him at all. I blocked him in any way I could. Recently, he found my new husband on Facebook and friended him. He blocked him as well. To this day, I still have a paranoia. I had parked my car near a baseball diamond once, and some kids most likely hit a baseball into the windshield and took off, because I had a perfectly baseball-sized spider crack up the glass. Despite it being completely logical that it was most likely a ball, I instantly reverted to, "Oh God, is he back?" I have no idea what happened to him. I also am now a total psycho about keeping things locked. Twice my life got screwed up because doors weren't locked. My car door, and most likely my apartment door. I have an acquaintance monitor him on Facebook. His page is not private, and from what they have seen, he appears to go through periods where he is pretty inactive and then episodes where he is rambling, overposting, oversharing, and acting generally deranged. I believe his parents were telling the truth when they stated that when he's medicated, he's okay. Part of me feels bad for him. I'm older now, and I've been a nurse for almost 10 years, some of which time was spent in a psych specialty. The mind is a hell of a thing. Looking back though, those were some of the worst years of my adult life. He put me through a lot of anxiety and caused a lot of issues for me. I slept with my couch pushed against my apartment door for the next 2 years before I moved out of there. I'm now married, but on nights where I'm home alone, I still find myself resisting the urge to stack furniture in front of the doors. One of the other fallout from this situation. Craig either sold, lost, or gave away my social security card that had been in my purse. Someone tried to file for Medicaid benefits in Arizona using my name and social, as well as obtained a job using my social and failed to pay any taxes, leaving me with a surprise asset freeze by the IRS and a whole financial mess that needed to be untangled before they unfroze my accounts and paid me back the money they started pulling out of my paychecks for the back taxes I had nothing to do with. My credit got extremely messed up for years because of it. And to this day, I have a lock on my social security number and monitor my accounts like a hawk. Morals of the story. Never leave your purse in the car, and always lock your doors. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more stories, make sure you go check out our video that we did over on Let's Read's channel. I'll have it pop up on the screen in the upper right-hand corner. At least it should be there. You'll also be able to find it in the description. Make sure that if you aren't already subscribed to his channel, you subscribe. This has been a collaboration a lot of people have asked for a while, so it was a pleasure to actually get it done. If you would like to stay up to date on all of my content, make sure you click the notification button. And if you didn't hear the stories that I wrote, make sure you check out the videos I posted, last week. I want to give a big thank you to Let's Read for helping me out on this. And seriously, if you aren't subscribed, go check them out. There's a lot of people that are convinced we sound like the same person. Even though I don't hear it, I think we sound different. Either way, best to be subscribed to both. More stories is never a bad thing. I will catch you all in the next video. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true. Bad bye. Wanting to scream but unable to move or even breathe. Hey, kitty. Hey. What? I'm recording, bro. Yeah, you can wait till after. I'll pet you after, dude. Go somewhere else. Right now. You go away, kitty cat. That's not away. That's closer. That's the opposite of away. You're hitting my microphone with you. Stop it. I'll pet you. I'll pet you. Okay. Yeah, you good cat. Yeah, you bad motherfucker. Yeah. Okay, now go lay down. Go do something, dude. Leaving me with a surprise asset freeze by the IRS and a whole financial mess that needed to be untangled before they unfroze my accounts and paid me back the money they started to pull out of my paychecks for the back taxes I had nothing to do with. Holy shit, that's a fucking long-ass sentence.